Holland, do you remember that night we spent election night 2016 together at that Mexican restaurant where we used to meet? We watched the early returns come in on the TVs.
I remember.
Okay. And now here we are in the middle of another election year already.
Yeah, what's your first political memory, Amy?
Well, I grew up in the D.C. area.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I have a lot of political memories of my family working with and for people in political office. I remember how upset the adults around me were when election results would come in and they weren't what they would have liked to have been. And I very clearly remember my dad saying, I want all of you to sit down. We need to watch this. This is a very important part of history, and everyone needs to watch this. And that was the resignation speech by then President Nixon. Another memory is when my high school marching band was tapped to be in a movie. We were part of a parade to inaugurate the first woman on the Supreme Court justice in the 1981 movie, The First Monday in October, which was released prior to the actual appointment of Sandra Day O'Connor in July of 1981. But I think my fondest memory would probably be when my girls and I have all voted together. That's been a really sweet thing.
Well, you have all these amazing political memories. I think my first political memory was either the 1983-84 election when Walter Mondale, Gary Hart, and Jesse Jackson were the leading Democrats. I remember that one. But the 1983 governor's race in Kentucky is the first real election that I remember because Martha Lane Collins won. And then when she won, she became the highest ranked Democratic woman in the U.S. and the first and to date only woman to be the governor of Kentucky. And mine was a house divided because my grandmother was an FDR Democrat. Diehard, never voted anything else. My father had been chairman of the Republican Party in Kentucky. So my mother had grown up Democrat, and then she switched when she got married. So my grandmother went and proudly cast her vote for Martha Lane Collins, and my mother went and promptly canceled it out by voting for Jim Bunning that year.
That happens.
Yeah, it does.
There are more than one house divided. Yes. Well, politics is fascinating, especially electoral politics, and hearing candidates tell stories about themselves and about their visions for our country and the world is captivating. From the outside, it can look easy to connect with voters. And in fact, people can be very critical of candidates who lack the ability to communicate powerful ideas through winsome stories. But I bet it's not as easy as it looks to tell effective stories on the campaign trail.
I bet it's not. We have two guests who can tell us, and when we're done with today's episode, we'll be ready to campaign for office.
I'll vote for you.
We have Deb Sofield and Phyllis Henderson with us. Welcome. Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
Deb is the president of her own executive speech coaching company, which trains women and men for success in speaking, presentation skills, media, and message development in the U.S. and abroad. She is also a visiting professor teaching public speaking at Harvard University, John F. Kennedy School of Government, Women and Public Policy Program. She is a longtime trainer for the Women's Campaign School at Yale University, where she is past president of the board. Deb represents the city of Greenville as a past chairman and current commissioner of public works for the Greenville water system, and is the first woman to hold this position since its inception in 1918. That's amazing. Woohoo! We're cheering out here. She was formerly a two-term member of Greenville City Council, and that's a lot. So, Deb, tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you're doing right now.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I play in the field of politics. I freely admit that. I am an executive speech coach, and I help a lot of people. I like to say that I help people find their voice and learn to use it.
I love that.
So that's the bottom line of what I do, whether it's interview coaching, helping you craft a presentation. I'm a TEDx coach. Everything pretty much falls under the ability to speak and be heard.
That's amazing. That's wonderful.
We're also welcoming Phyllis Henderson to the table tonight. Phyllis is a former member of the South Carolina House of Representatives, representing District 21. She held that office from 2010 to 2018. Prior to her time in the State House, Phyllis served on Greenville County Council from 2000 to 2004 and was chairman from 2003 to 2004, the first woman chair since the early 1970s.
Woohoo, we got a couple of pioneer women here.
Mm-hmm. Phyllis received her BA from the University of Cincinnati in 1982 and her MPA from the Indiana University in 1984. At the time of her service in the State House, her professional experience included working as a management analyst for the city of Greenville and serving as vice president of governmental affairs for the Greater Greenville Chamber of Commerce. Phyllis also worked as the campaign manager for the Jim DeMint for Congress campaign in 1988. So you've had a lot of experience both running for office and legislating from office. Tell us about what you're up to since you left the State House.
Yeah, so since I left the State House, I work in development. I do fundraising at Roper Mountain Science Center here in Greenville. I was with Leadership South Carolina today, and several people asked me, and I said, I was a fierce fundraiser in the State House, which we'll talk about at some point, is always a really difficult issue for everybody, especially women. So it was a natural that I went to work there, raising money for, STEM education for kids in grade school and middle school. So
That's
really,
fantastic.
and having time to do other things like act and sing and volunteer and do things that I've never had time to do when I was in Columbia all the time.
Where did you act and sing?
I just finished a show at Milltown Players. I did Bright Star there. I'm doing a
great.
show. I'm on a contract to do a show at Center Stage in the spring. So
Let me interject. She was excellent. We all went down and cheered her on. It was a lot of fun to
It
see our
was a
friend
good
on the
show.
stage again.
I will say it was a great show.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun.
Very good. Well, congratulations.
Okay, let's jump in and talk about politics since we're on stages and shows and acting.
All right.
Lots of people love to share their opinions about politics, but not very many people actually run for office. And I think that's especially true of women, unfortunately. The percentage of women seeking federal office was the highest it's ever been in 2018, and that was 23%. So the two of you have been in elected office for a lot longer than that. What made you take a strong enough interest to actually jump into the race?
Well, first of all, I appreciate you not saying, boy, y'all have been around. Well, for me, to be honest with you, I thought there is a similarity between the theater, the stage, and politics, because it's that old, all the world's a stage thing. Jim DeMint was my friend, and I had been working in governmental affairs. I got interested in high school, actually, kind of like y'all had a high school government class for a grade, make us go work on a campaign. And so I actually started off majoring in music and decided to change to poli sci really on a whim, but that's kind of how I got interested in it. But I ran the campaign, and after I spent those 2 years, I thought, I would like to run myself. And we didn't have any. We had some women in office then, but they were Democrats, and that was in 2000. And so, I've kind of been doing it off and on ever since.
That's wonderful.
What about you, Deb?
So my story is a little bit different. My parents were not political at all, but I love red, white, and blue. I love barbecue. I love this country. I'm adopted. I'm a naturalized citizen here. But I will tell you, I started too right out of college. And true story, Knox White was running for Congress. I worked on that campaign. The phone rang one night during a staff meeting on a Sunday. I'll never forget. Very cold outside. We had one of those cold snaps. And a lady on the phone said, "Mr. White, you're not my councilman." He was on Greenville City Council. "But I don't have any heat or any money, and you're the one I've been told to call." And I remember watching Knox pick up the phone and make a call to the Share the Warmth. And because of his position with that night, she got oil in her tank. And I remember thinking there was a very young staffer right out of college thinking, I'm on the wrong side of the table. I don't want to be the worker. I want to make a call, and I want someone to get something done. And that story has stayed with me. I vividly remember, and in her neighborhood that night, someone did die due to cold, inebriated, didn't come in out of the cold. So an unusual situation, but he made a call and something happened. And I said, man, that's the place for me.
I love that. I wish that we could have that happen with every politician and something would
Get
happen.
done. Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I love that. Well, storytelling is wonderful. We all love stories. But let's talk about storytelling and political campaigns. And so Mark McKinnon is the chief strategy and media advisor to a former U.S. president and a producer of a Showtime hit called The Circus, says that voters favor the presidential candidate who tells the best stories. Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton were masterful storytellers, and despite their political differences, the two men appealed to many of the same voters through their facility with stories. So what's the first piece of advice you give your clients about storytelling on the campaign trail, Deb? And I love that you already said part of your mission is to help people find their voice and then be able to use it. So what would you tell that person?
Bottom line, you have to tell the truth. So Bill Clinton, remember, He did a Saturday radio address, and he said in our country in the 50s and 60s, black churches were burned to intimidate civil rights workers. I had a vivid and painful memory of black churches being burned in my own state when I was a child. And the fact is that is not true. And so his storytelling is marred throughout his whole career with things that just aren't so. So my point is, you tell the truth, because somebody will fact check you. And then he had to change it. Well, it wasn't black churches. Maybe it was black-owned buildings. And then over time, a very sensitive subject that deserved a conversation was now gone because of his inability. He just thought he could be so emotional and bring this to the table. The African-American community was very unhappy with it. His state was unhappy. And I found a quote where Clinton's offhand comment during that radio show alleging churches burning in Arkansas were fabrications.
Interesting.
And that's the period end of that conversation. So you've got to tell the truth. Second, they have to be your stories. I can't tell you how many times in the political circle I hear other people's stories. You cannot do that. And third, you have to have a message of hope or hopefulness. To be a successful politician, you have to have a message of hope. So 3 points. You can't lie. They have to be your stories. And it has to be a message of hope or hopefulness for your audience to engage, follow, trust, and believe.
Those are powerful points. What about you, Phyllis?
Related to that, I would say honesty, and I mean honesty not so much in the truthful sense, but honest to who you are as a person. The best example I have, I'll never forget, Katie Arrington, who just ran for Congress, was a colleague of mine, and she decided she was going to run. She started off in this very dogged, like very intense, like woman, just beating the pavement, thought that the way to win was just to be this hardcore. And I remember I was on an opioid abuse prevention task force. We were having a hearing in Charleston, and I was sitting in the, Doubletree Hotel lobby with her and a friend of ours who was a lobbyist with CVS, and someone else came along. So I was having this conversation, and I overhear her telling Courtney from CVS her life story. And she's telling all this story about how her husband was a veteran, how she had a child that had this almost fatal brain disease that he brought back on a stuffed animal doll that he brought back, and they didn't know. And she lived in the hospital, and he divorced her, and she, built herself up from her bootstraps and built this business and became successful. And I was like, hold on. And I turned to her and I said, where has this story been?
Yeah.
Like, this is who you are. This, I believe to this day, that if that had been the story of her, she would have gotten elected. And instead, she took this, take a hammer and bound somebody over the head and try to make everybody believe that she's as tough as men. And it turned a lot of people. I mean, she had a bunch of other problems too, but I just was like, you have to tell the story of your life, how it is you came to be affected by whatever it is your life experience has been, because that's what people want to understand. One other really, really quick one, and that is the first time I ran, I was a stay-at-home mom. I was the entire time, and I was very insecure about it because I thought, for heaven's sakes, nobody's going to vote for me because I'm nobody. I mean, I don't own a business, but I was just so taken by so many people who responded to that because that was who I was, and they were at home too, or they had children too, or they were raising a family, and it wasn't a negative. But we had to be able to get over that insecurity of really being vulnerable in order to be effective. But it's just true and honesty, truth to your person, yourself.
I love that. And I think that's that authenticity. If you're going to be able to tell your own story, it has to be your story. And then you can be true to yourself. Then you don't have to worry. It frees you up. You don't have to backpedal and wonder, which version of me do I need to tell at this gathering? How do I need a code switch here?
But what Phyllis isn't telling you is that she was the lobbyist for the chamber down in Columbia. So she had this background. But that's before you got married, changed your name. And so we knew, those of us who knew her, we knew that she could do the job. Because we had that understanding of who she was. So that was a long time ago. But we already knew you would be great.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, again, storytelling is more than speech making. It's done in podcasts, and one of the ones that Holland and I enjoy is the one from the Washington Post called Presidential, and radio interviews, print media, paid advertising. How is campaign storytelling different when you get to control the narrative, such as a paid commercial or a speech to your supporters? What do you think, Phyllis?
Well, that's an easy thing. I was sitting here actually focusing on the other side of it because I had a great example for it. But I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, really, that you have to be pretty honest with who you are and what your intentions are, because you can't be artificial.
Yeah.
It's just
So position the two against each other for us. So you've got that time when you control the narrative because everybody out there likes you and you're standing up and speaking to your friends at your event. And then there's when you're facing people who don't like you,
what life hands you.
Somebody, right? You're
Yeah.
facing maybe a journalist or your opponent at a debate. How's it different when you're telling your story at your event versus telling your story and somebody else is controlling
Well, a
the
lot of
environment?
times it's someone else is controlling, or at least in this world, you're responding to something that has come your way. And sometimes you can't control it. I don't even know if I want to dive into my Jesse Jackson story, but the first meeting that I chaired as chairman, I was elected chairman at the first meeting in January and the second meeting in January.
Remember this. I remember this.
Operation Rainbow Push showed, and they were demanding a county holiday. And all of a sudden, I just had this platter of just junk, and I thought, what in the world, am I going to do with this? And I'm not going to say that I did a good job at all. And it was just, I could talk about it for quite a while, but, and I remember days where I would walk out to the curb. That's the days when we used to get the newspaper. The printed newspaper, and you didn't know what was going to be said about you until you went out there and opened it. And I remember, I have told this story so many times, walking out to the curb, picking up the newspaper, with a cup of coffee and going, oh, what are they saying about me today? And I'd open it up and be like, okay, not too bad. Or, because it's what you've been dealt. It's the hand, and you have to play it.
Yeah.
You can't not play it.
Right.
You can't fold it. You have to play it. Right. And so I think that's the hard part. And you have to think quickly, and you don't have a lot of time.
Right.
You just kind of have to go, because politics is image, it's messaging, it's ever very quickly changing. It's even quicker now than it used to be. But that's the difficulty, I think, of when you don't control it. You really have no idea what's coming your way, and you have to make decisions quickly. Sometimes they're not the best. And then after it's over, there was a lot of misunderstandings in that whole process for me. It inevitably led to me losing my reelection in 2004 and making me never want to go back to politics again. But, I did. But it's very difficult.
Yeah. That's a tough narrative. What about you, Deb?
So I take it from a different perspective. I think you always circle back to your original message. You are in control. I don't care what anybody says. That's when you use what we call a soft landing or transition. You make an interesting point. You should also know. So what have I done? I've been gracious. I've acknowledged you. And now we're going where I want to go. So if you are not careful, and you will get hit unless you're good, and you have to practice this. The other thing, as a coach, I remind my clients, tell the story, but don't tell all the story. Let the client fill in the rest of the message, because they will go to the positive. So you've heard people and you think, well, if you had just stopped 10 minutes ago, I would have voted for you. But no, you continued on. So I really encourage people, let my mind fill in the blanks, because most people will fill into what they want, the positive. So if somebody comes after me, I'll be gracious and kind, but I'm kind of known as the hammer, and I will move you to the direction of the message that I came to deliver. Now, if you're good, they never see it coming. If you're bad, they'll say, but you didn't answer my question. And then you have to give an answer that you believe is truthful. But remember, it's hard to tell people this. Your whole campaign rarely hinges on one bad answer. Right. Now, what we haven't talked about is the goodwill that you build throughout the years. So when something happens, you go, I cannot believe I said that. Yeah. And the audience goes, well, she says silly stuff a lot. but I've already built goodwill. And I think people just don't trust that gut that says, I've built goodwill. Hey, you know what? I might have made an error here. Let me learn and move on.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of folks who go, well, I guess I blew it, and they walk away. Yeah, that's not going to be good for your future.
Sure. And it's that acknowledgement and willing to admit the wrong, to make the amends and make the behavioral amends.
But it's humor. Don't forget this humor.
Yep.
You know, you come fighting back at me and you've just started a war. That's why you can never say but or however. You make an interesting point, but you're a moron. No, you can't say that. So you've got to learn the tricks of the trade, and that's why you have to practice this.
That's excellent advice.
So let's peel another layer off this onion and talk about storytelling that maybe doesn't involve speaking. We could think about things like your style, your dress. Just as an example, if you look at the Democratic presidential primary debates, each of them has a style that they are using that's part of the story they're telling, what they wear, how it looks. They're communicating something very specific with that. So if we look at the Democrats' debate stage, Pete Buttigieg always dresses like a Boy Scout. And that's part of a larger story he's telling about his life and his experience and his way of governing. Elizabeth Warren wears the exact same black dress or pantsuit with a shell top that's in the same kind of colors pattern. I think that's also very purposeful, right? It's part of how she's presenting who she is and what she would do. What else tells a story about a candidate besides words?
All right. So I'm going to start with your Mayor Pete, who
Okay.
I think is a terrible example, but here's the deal. Mayor Pete is the mayor of a failing city. So the reason he looks like a Boy Scout is he's trying to say, look, I'm not that bad. I don't want my president to look like a Boy Scout. All right. I want you to dress for the job you're going for. Elizabeth Warren, I'm not too impressed that she wears that outfit. We have told women on both sides of the aisle, stop dressing monochrome. Have a little bit of style. I think her wealth is she's hiding. So she dresses this way to say, I'm not a millionaire, but you are a millionaire. Mm-hmm. So I believe it is a false narrative. I mean, Kamala Harris dresses to the nines. So you stop to look and figure out what they're doing. Yes, it's purposeful. We dress our candidates to the T. And to say we don't, Andrew Yang, who would not wear a tie, that was the discussion. Okay, well, that doesn't make any sense. What about your wanting to be the president? So when I coach candidates, if it's a man, he has to wear shoes that clip on the stage. I want to hear that military march on the stage. That's why guys don't wear soft shoes. So there's little things that we are doing that you will see, but you don't realize what we've done already, as you were suggesting that Elizabeth Warren is doing with her clothing.
All right. Fascinating. I have just received an education. Wow.
What's something specific women candidates should do?
They need to wear color and you need to wear bling. This whole idea of hiding your wealth, nobody's going to vote for you because you're poor. If you're not successful enough to get out of the gutter, you're going nowhere. And they call me and they go, well, should I wear my diamonds? Absolutely. Because otherwise, did your husband give you the diamonds? Did your partner? Did your significant other? Nah, do it. It's interesting. There's a fine line. You know, the whole argument is, why don't they wear an American flag pin? Seriously, we're picking a president who refuses to wear American flag pins. Yeah, what about leading the free world? So, yeah, it's all in there together. Trust me, it is magnified, discussed, pulled apart, changed, put back together. We're just trying to reach the middle of the road to get enough voters to get over the edge. Just get me to the end, and then I'll wear what I want.
Wow.
Didn't realize clothes were that.
It's huge.
Had that much volume. But I guess they do.
Yeah.
What about you, Phyllis?
I approach this from a whole different level, and I'm not even really talking about the campaign trail, but from experience, from the standpoint of women in elective office and women in service. When I first got elected to the House, there's very few Republican women out of our whole caucus, and it's like you see all of them approaching their job and their desires to be a leader or a committee chair or this or that, making a difference, how they decide that they want to approach that. And it includes clothing and other things. But I will tell you, here's what I've noticed. One of my former colleagues. She wanted to be the assistant majority leader and all this kind of stuff. Well, she owned a kindergarten. And I saw right away that I was watching how you treat people. She was always trying to tell, especially the men, because this is a men's world, trying to tell them what to do. Well, Holland, you know what you should do? You should get this thing. You should write all these people this letter. And she'd sit down like that, and you could see their eyes glaze over because they're like, I have a wife or a sister or a mom at home who's always telling me what to do. I don't want a woman to tell me what to do. And then there's the women who are trying to be like your best friend, but in a kind of more like, hey, give you a hug, kind of like a little too cozy way. And then that turns into the person that's like not serious and may go over the line from time to time. Those people are discounted. And then there's the ones that are like trying to be super pally and, you know, they dress a little like non-feminine and they're tough and they're mean. And there's the ones that really get mad at you if they walk up to you in the hallway and give you a hug. You know, it's like, Senator, you can't do that. So I watched all of that my first couple years and I was like, wow, this is a tough road for a woman. How do you blend all that together in something that's going to work? Sure. And so, you know, I had my style and I wasn't too overly friendly, but it's like if people would come up in the hallway and want to say, hey, you look really good, it's a compliment.
Right.
Okay? It's a compliment. You can tell when it's over the line. So I think what I was trying to say is that there's so much more to it once you get in, right? And once you're really dealing with people is that as a woman especially, because there's just so many different facets of who we are and how do you blend that all together? I mean, I take a little bit of difference with Deb on the, be successful because I do think people want you to be relatable. And, if you look like somebody that's way out of my realm, you're not going to understand what my life is like. So it's really hard, and it's different for every person. But I think that those are the kind of things that tell more your story than maybe other things as you start moving through, once you get elected or, once you're there and trying to do the job or get reelected, people want to know how you act, how you treat other people. And
so there is a line we like to say, women can't be the wife, the mother, the daughter, or the mistress. And you'll be put into one of those positions. Yep. So you need to think through who you're going to be. Because if you end up being the wife, well, you're always nagging and nobody wants to listen to you. If you're the mistress, you quite never know, are you in, are you out today? Are you the daughter? Well, I love you, but you're not quite as good just yet. And who'd I leave out? The mother? The mother's the one who's always in your head. So, yeah. And I know it's silly, but we actually have those conversations.
Yeah.
Don't be those people.
Right. So what's left?
Yourself.
a little bit of everything.
Yeah. Your amazing self.
Yeah.
Wow. It's amazing how much this conversation has not changed in 50 years. I don't remember this, but I've seen it when Margaret Thatcher first visited the U.S. And she went before the press and she opened her speech with, I stand before you tonight with my fair hair gently waved, in my red chiffon gown and my face gently made up. The Iron Lady of the Western world. Yeah. And everybody laughed, but it was she was really calling it out. And here we are 50 years later, still sitting here saying.
No, we are.
But I would say that example of Margaret Thatcher, she probably encapsulated all of what you just said, Deb, in being true to yourself, telling your story, being positive and hopeful. I mean, she had to do all three of those. And she navigated not being any of the caricatures of that role.
But with humor.
Yeah.
With humor.
Yes.
And it totally disarmed them all.
Wow. Well, we have learned a lot in this episode. And, one of the things, too, we talk about in storytelling, words are just a part of story. It's just a part. Body language, how we present, how we speak, if our message is true and honest, that's part of the story as well. That's innate. And sometimes that's not something you can teach. Something that you can coach maybe would be to speak clearly, to wear different types of clothing, but some of this is innate. And I think I'm pretty excited about how the rest of this conversation is going to continue.
I don't think it's innate, but anyway, we can talk about that next time. I think anybody can be trained to do it. Join us next week as we continue to have this Now, controversial conversation.
Okay.
That's as controversial as we ever get on this.
Well, we couldn't be happier.
As we talk with executive speech coach Deb Sofield and former state representative Phyllis Henderson about how words and stories impact politics and candidates. While you wait, please leave us a review, rate us on iTunes, and become a subscriber to the afterwordpodcast.com. It does help us keep the conversations going. And as always, remember that you are welcome at our table.